As we start the Song of Solomon tonight, you remember that the Shulammite has made her decision that she's going to be marrying a shepherd, and the shepherd has come and he has taken her back from Solomon's palace. And they are in the process of going out into the country. As they're going out into the country, you remember she is speaking directly to the shepherd now, and he is speaking directly to her. And she has told him how it is that she knows they're going to have a successful marriage, that they've both come from loving homes. Her mother has taught her how to please a man, and she's going to be a loving wife. And so she knows that they're going to have a successful marriage. And what we have now is that the actual marriage procession is starting. They've left Solomon's palace. We've seen the maidens for the last time. And the wedding festival is beginning. And as I told you before, part of their wedding festival was for the boy to go where the girl was and to get her and to take her back to his home where the festival took place. So we have here the chorus of country people in Song of Solomon chapter 8, verse 5. And remember last week I told you that this is scene number 3. So we're beginning scene number 3. And this is out in the country as they are traveling through the countryside, through the villages. And the chorus of country people in verse 5 say, "Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved?" So they've seen the Shulammite go into Jerusalem with Solomon, and now they are seeing the Shulammite come back with a different man, with a shepherd, and they are very curious. They're wanting to know what is going on. So they are saying, "Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved?" And then, whether or not the shepherd is speaking loud enough for all of the people to hear, more or less answering their question and telling them what is going on, or maybe he is just speaking directly to the Shulammite just for her ears only, we're going to see that the shepherd is going to tell us how it is he won over King Solomon. So whether he's kind of bragging to the people or just acknowledging this to the Shulammite, he's going to tell us his secret, how it is that a poor, humble shepherd boy could beat out King Solomon for the handmaiden's hand. And we see this in the latter part of verse 5, where the shepherd is speaking now, speaking for himself for the first time. And he says, "Beneath the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in labor with you. There she was in labor and gave you birth." So he's saying, beneath the apple tree where your mother was in labor and gave you birth. Now, naturally, where this apple tree would be in her own backyard. He's saying, I spent time at your home, where you grew up, where you spend your time. I spent time there with you, and I awakened you. This word awakened, if you would like to draw a circle around it and draw an arrow back up to verse 4, where we have the theme of the book, where it says, "Do not arouse or awaken my love." These are the same words. So she begged the maidens, don't arouse or awaken my love until it is time, until it is ready. And now the shepherd says, I awakened you. I awakened your love by spending time with you. And the shepherd is going to tell us really a very important secret about how it is that a man should get along with a woman. He's going to tell us something about a woman's needs that Solomon refused to acknowledge. And we're going to learn a very important key about getting along with a woman and having a successful marriage. So first of all, he says that he awoke her love in courtship. So here in Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verse 5, he's telling us that he spent all of this time getting to know her mentally, getting to know her as a person, talking about their goals and their dreams of life, and awakening her love in this way. And so this is something that is really very important for courtship, but it is also something that is very important when a couple gets married. In Deuteronomy 24, verse 5, and let's turn over there and notice how that God is cautioning men to recognize this characteristic of women when they first get married. In Deuteronomy 24, verse 5, here it is, he says, "When a man takes a new wife, he shall not go out with the army, nor be charged with any duty. He shall be free at home 1 year, and shall give happiness to his wife whom he has taken." So here it is, he's saying, God is telling a young man, when you get married, you spend that first year at home with your wife, giving her happiness. You don't join the army and leave home. You don't get some kind of a traveling salesman job so you're always away. You spend that first year strengthening and building that emotional bond with your new wife, because this is something that is very critical to the success of a marriage. However, this is very different than we often do it in our society today. I remember when my husband was going to school, he had a real good friend that was dating this girl that he just really liked. And so he told my husband he was going to go ahead and marry her. And his argument was, the reason to go ahead and marry her before he got out of school was that it just took so much time to take a girl out to the show and take her to dinner and spend all of this time courting her. And if he would go ahead and marry her, then he wouldn't have to spend so much time doing all those things, and he could get back to the important things of studying and keeping his grades up and all of this. Well, this is just exactly backwards of what God is telling a young man to do. You place your priorities with your wife, getting acquainted with her. Then, of course, when a young man gets out of school, starts his career, then that's a time, a lot of times, when he's working very hard under tremendous pressure, trying to succeed in his career. And so a young couple may never get to spend this time together building bonds and creating a relationship with each other. One book that I read said that this author recommended that a young couple not even buy a television. He says that if they have a television, what they're going to do that first year is they're going to be watching television together instead of talking to each other and going out and doing things together. I know one young girl who tried that. She said she and her husband talked about that. They decided not to buy a television, and she said it was great. The bonds that they built in the first 2 years of their marriage, because they were more or less forced to talk to each other, was something that she greatly valued and was something that was very important to her. So God is saying this is important. Women need this emotional bonding. They need it in courtship. They need it when they're first married, and they need it really all through the middle years. This is something that a woman never gets, where she doesn't need this emotional bonding with her husband. In Ecclesiastes 9:9, we've looked at this verse before, but we want to notice it again. Here it is. The book of Ecclesiastes is talking about what a man's reward is for working out in the world and just leave God out of it. Just what is a man's reward for all of his labor? In Ecclesiastes 9:9, he says, "Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life, which he has given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life, and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun." So when a man comes home from a hard day of work, what's his reward? His reward is to enjoy life with the woman whom he loves, to spend time with her. Of course, this is something that is very important to women, but all the way through the Bible we see that God is emphasizing this for the man. It is important during courtship. This is the way the shepherd won the Shulammite over King Solomon, is by spending time with her, getting to know her. It's important for a young married man, and it's also something that is important for an older man to see to it that he spends this time with his wife. And if I was going to rate the qualities of what makes a successful marriage and say just what, if I could give a man just one piece of advice, what piece of advice would I choose for that man? What would I think was the most important advice that I could give a man on how to make his wife happy? And if I had to just narrow it down to one piece of advice, it would be what the shepherd is saying here. I awakened you under the apple tree. I spent time with you. And so this is something that is extremely important to a woman. A woman will put up with all kinds of hardships if she has this emotional bonding with a man. And it's something that's very important, and is something that men need to realize that it is very important. In our society today, we often go to extremes. Here's a little cartoon that represents one extreme. Up here at the first cartoon, we have the man and the woman up here riding on the bus together, and he looks over at her and he kind of likes what he sees. And the next one he says, pardon me. And then he tells her, in the next one he says, you look like a nice person. Will you marry me? Then down here at the bottom he says, I know it sounds impulsive, but I have some great character references. And you can see he's getting them out of his briefcase, letting her look them over. Then he tells her, who can afford a long courtship these days with the price of movies and pizzas? And then he's real generous here, and he tells her, take your time. We have 6 blocks to go before we pass the courthouse. So this is what we would call a real whirlwind romance. Let's get married. It's going to take us 6 blocks to look over my references and figure out exactly what kind of a husband that I would make. Well, people go to this extreme, maybe not just in six blocks, but they still go to this extreme of whirlwind romances. Yet there is another extreme that people also go to, and that is of cohabiting, of trial marriage, trying to see if that's going to be what's going to make a successful marriage. I have an article here by Dr. Joyce Brothers that she wrote for Reader's Digest. And of course, she's not caring about what God says about any of this. She's just looking at it strictly from a worldly point of view. Is cohabiting the way to have a successful marriage? She says, And quoting some people here, she says, people today say, I wouldn't dream of marrying someone I hadn't lived with. That's like buying shoes you haven't tried on. Sounds logical, doesn't it? If a couple find they are compatible after a trial period of cohabitation, they marry. If not, they separate. They find out before marriage whether they'll get along, and that should cut down on the divorce rate, right? Wrong, say sociologist Alfred D. Marcis of the University of Maryland and Gerald Leslie of the University of Florida. In 1983, they studied two groups of couples married for at least 1 year, but less than 2. In one group, the couples had lived together before marriage, and in the other, they had not. And they found that cohabitation held no particular advantage in assuring the compatibility in marriage. The researchers suggest that the types of learning that occur during cohabitation aren't as relevant to marriage as we usually assume. And they say that cohabitation as a testing ground for marriage hasn't really met the test. Consider, Shelley and Scott finally had set their wedding date. At least we know this is one marriage that will work, said Scott's mother, whose 3 marriages hadn't. After all, Shelley and Scott had lived together for 5 years. Surely this had given them a chance to iron out their differences. Or had it? Even before the ceremony, they were arguing about where to spend the honeymoon. And before the honeymoon was over, they were having sexual difficulties. Hadn't their 5 years together counted for anything? They frequently don't, said the psychologist. To maintain their living together relationship, couples often hide from each other important aspects of their true selves. Gersenfeld surveyed 100 couples who had lived together at least 6 months, had married each other, and then divorced within 5 years. She asked if, before marriage, they had ever discussed finances, careers, leisure activities, and whether or not they wanted children. The majority of the couples had, but only in the most general terms. They had been reluctant to explore these areas because they were afraid differences might mar the relationship, she explained. Living together, the couples frequently spoke and behaved cautiously, avoided criticizing each other, and repressed anger. Since they had mistakenly assumed that all irritating traits would magically disappear upon marriage, their hostile feelings then emerged, each person trying to redo the other into a more acceptable partner. And it says also, but if living together appears to have little correlation with happiness in marriage, then why do so many Americans cohabit? And they say one reason that they do is because of the nature-culture gap, which we talked about in our very first class. And she goes on to say that puberty was once the line dividing childhood and adulthood. Shortly thereafter, young people began marrying and starting to rear their families. They shouldered the responsibilities and enjoyed the privileges of adults. Not so anymore. Most young people go on to high school. About half go on to college. That's a long wait between a sexual maturing conferred by nature and cultural maturity conferred by society. An estimated 1/4 of college students have cohabited at one time or another. But both the students who cohabited and those who didn't desired to eventually marry. They said they found in these studies at different universities that the cohabitants were normal kids trying to make the best of a nature-culture bind of which many parents are unaware. So here this article is saying, without any regard for God whatsoever, is saying that many people cohabit thinking this is going to ensure us of a good, happy marriage, but when the facts are examined, that there's really no guarantee, because when people are living together, they are pretending to be something that they are not. They're afraid to explore disagreements. They're afraid that they'll break up the relationship because there is not the commitment that there is in a marriage. You know, you can have disagreements in a marriage, but because you're committed to each other, then you know that you're going to have to stay there and work out those problems, and you're not going to be able to run away from them. So there is an area of safety in dealing with problems in marriage that there is not in just living with someone. Okay, here's another article that talks about what's the key to real intimacy, and it's by Dr. Daniel B. Wiley. And he says, what makes a marriage strong and happy and truly intimate? What is the single most important ingredient? In my 20 years as a clinical psychologist and practicing therapist, I have posed this question to many men and women. Most of them answer with one of the following: common interests, companionship, trust, loyalty, commitment, sex, love, raising children together. They're often surprised when I tell them that I believe that there is one element more important than anything they've mentioned. And that key ingredient is the ability of both partners to say what they need to say in a way that the other will understand. It is, in fact, this kind of special communication that makes the other elements in a good marriage, common interests, trust, love, and so on, so enjoyable and worthwhile. And yet most couples find this kind of communicating very hard to do. They cannot say the sometimes tough, scary things that must be said. And he goes on in this article to talk about that communication between a husband and wife, it needs to be very personal, honest, and it's something that may take years to develop. You don't just get married having this kind of communication, but it's something that you work on and you develop. And then he says, what do couples need? He says many couples would prefer to avoid issues that are especially sensitive or that they fear may cause conflict. But avoiding those issues does nothing to enhance and much to destroy intimate relationships. What are the topics most frequently left out of intimate conversations that couples need to discuss on a regular basis in order to keep genuine communication between them alive? It says they need to talk about irritations and worries, particularly those that pertain to the relationship. They need to talk about their own wishes and fantasies. Again, those that pertain to the relationship, and when appropriate, how these wishes and fantasies are not being realized. They need to talk about their hesitation to bring up unpleasant subjects for fear they might hurt or anger each other. And they need to acknowledge the awkward, sometimes hurtful ways in which they occasionally blurt those things out. They need to engage in genuine conversations, not just arguments about all of the above. They need a chance to jointly lament the fact that sometimes it seems especially difficult to make a relationship work. It says all couples need to have these discussions, and yet few couples do. As a result, many couples feel vaguely deprived. They sense that something is lacking in their relationship, and they cast about for a particular problem, such as incompatibility or lack of common interest on which to pin such feelings. And then he says, the truth is always better. It is said that one picture is worth 1,000 words. That may be true, but the right words can also be worth 1,000 pictures, and that can help resolve seemingly irresolvable problems. And then, it is important then for husbands and wives to express their complaints and to allow their partner to do the same. It is equally important for spouses to feel free to express their worries. Now, the main thing this article is emphasizing is that couples many times do not have the skills to talk about problems between them, that they haven't built up this bond where there is this commitment, there's this understanding where they can bring up problems and know that the other one is going to try to understand rather than to turn around and use it against them. And while this is emphasizing the negative, we need to keep in mind that God emphasizes both the negative and the positive in communication. One of the positive aspects that we've spent a lot of time on in our class is that of reverence, learning how to be sure that we say the positive things for our husbands. That's very important to them. But yet in Ephesians 4, verse 25, this is where God tells us not to let the sun go down on our anger, that we are to speak the truth to one another. So we are to deal with our problems in a good way. And so the shepherd is saying, I've won the Shulammite because I spent time under the apple tree, getting to know her, developing this ability to communicate with her. And this is something that God wants all couples to spend time doing, because communication is a very highly important aspect of marriage. Now, as the shepherd is going on, he's telling the secret about how it is he won her, and then now he's going to tell us the power of love. In Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verse 6, he tells us the power of love. He says, put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death, and jealousy as strong as Sheol. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it. If a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, it would be utterly despised. So here it is, the shepherd has been spending time with the Shulammite out under the apple tree. He's been building this emotional bond with her, and yet he nearly lost her. He nearly lost her to King Solomon. And so he's telling her, you put me like a seal over your arm, just like you wear a band on your arm that says, I belong to the shepherd. He says, you make your love just as obvious to everyone and to me that you belong to me. And so she's made these pledges to him to give her love to him, and he's saying, you keep your pledges, you don't withhold your love from me, and you make it just as obvious as you can that you love me, you belong to me. And he says, for love is as strong as death. You know, when we think about how strong death is so strong that someday every single one of us is going to die. It doesn't matter how many vitamins we take. It doesn't matter how good an exercise program we've got. Death is so strong that someday it is going to claim every one of us. And so the shepherd is saying that true love is as strong as death. True love can survive the most horrible problems. It can survive the most horrible trials. And he says, you recognize this, and let's face the trials of life together. In recent times, we've had some good examples of love that was as strong as death. You remember back when the POWs came back from Vietnam, and there were a lot of articles in the newspapers telling about what these men came home to. Some of these men came home to women who had waited up to 8 years and maybe more for them to come home. They had faithfully waited for their husbands, praying for their husbands, trying to campaign for their husbands to come home, doing whatever they could. They and their children had waited for these men, and they were there to help these men recover from the horrors of war and to help rebuild their lives. Yet there were other men at the very same time who came back from these POW camps, and they found that their wives had divorced them, that their wives had married other men and started other families, and that their love had not withstood this test of time, this test of separation. So we've seen in our time a very good example of how strong love can be. And this is what the shepherd is saying. For true love is as strong as death. It can withstand anything, and that's what I want. Then he says, jealousy is as severe as Sheol. And Sheol is just the unseen world. If you go down into Sheol, if you die and you go to Sheol, you're not seen anymore. So destruction is another word for that. Of course, he maybe knows a little bit about jealousy because he, like the other country people, has known that she was in King Solomon's camp, that she had gone to his palace to investigate him. And so he's saying, this is a very strong emotion. Don't put me in a position of where I'm going to be tempted to be jealous and be tempted to have to deal with this very strong emotion. Notice how he describes it. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. And so it is a very strong emotion. And then he's saying that true love can't be destroyed. He says, many waters cannot quench love, nor will rivers overflow it. So true love can survive whatever life throws at it. And then if a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, it would be utterly despised. So true love can't be destroyed, and neither can true love be bought. Now, essentially, this is what King Solomon was doing. He was offering her all of his riches and all of his wealth, and it's something that true love cannot be bought. And so he's saying that when a man gets true love, or when he tries to buy love, then it is despised. And this is one of the reasons why our husbands don't come up and ask us to love them and to do little affectionate things for them. Because if they have to ask us for our affection, then it doesn't mean as much to them as when we give it to them freely. So the shepherd here is really teaching us some very important things about human nature, that true love has a tremendous power, but it is something that needs to be given freely in order for it to have the effect that it should. Now what we're going to see as we get up into verse 8, this is going to be scene number 4. So this is the last scene in the Song of Solomon, scene number 4. And the location of this scene is probably out in the garden, which was their most popular place to have weddings. And the reason I think it is out in the garden is because when we get down to verse 13, the shepherd is going to say, "O you who sit in the gardens." So this is where the Shulammite is, and no doubt this is where everyone else is, whether they're sitting out there at a banquet table in order to have enough room for all the people, or if they're just lounging around and walking around in the garden, I don't know. But the scene is the garden. So we can picture either a very lovely garden at the shepherd's home, or perhaps a garden outside the city, as was common for them. And so what they're going to do is they are going to ask the Shulammite a wedding riddle. Now, riddles were a common part of Jewish weddings. You remember back whenever Samson got married, when his first wife, he asked the riddle about the lion and the honey, and gave them a day or so in order to find the answer to the riddle. And he told his new bride the answer, and then she told the other guests, and we find all the problems that came from that. But asking riddles at a wedding was a common thing that they did at weddings. So they have a riddle for the Shulammite. And this riddle reflects what has been going on. They have seen her go to Jerusalem. They have seen her come back, and they're curious about all of this and why it is that she's married the shepherd. So in verse 8, they say, "We have a little sister, and she has no breasts. What shall we do for our sister on the day when she is spoken for?" Now, the significance of this little sister who has no breasts is that she has not yet reached puberty. She has not yet reached this age where all girls can do is look in the mirror and primp and think about boys and how do I look, and start to wonder about how to attract a fella. She's too young for that. Several years ago, my husband was teaching the book of Proverbs in an adult class, and there was a little girl in there sitting with her father. And my husband was talking about flattery and how boys use flattery on girls and can deceive them in this way. And this little girl was like the little girl here in the Song of Solomon. She had no breasts. She was too young for love. And so she turned to her dad and she says, "Dad," she says, "if a boy ever tells me I'm beautiful, I'm going to slap him." And she was serious. This was her attitude. Of course, we all know just a few years down the line, some boy starts telling her she's beautiful. She's going to be listening and paying attention, just like the Shulammite did when Solomon came along and told her that she was so beautiful and just continually described her. This caught her attention. Well, these people want to know about their little sister. The time to start thinking about little sister is before puberty, before she starts getting interested in boys. And so they're saying, what shall we do for our little sister when she starts to get interested in boys? So this is the riddle. Now they're going to come along and they're going to answer their own riddle and more or less ask the Shulamite, is this right? Is this the right conclusion that we're drawing? So what we're going to see as they answer the riddle, they're going to see what should we do for her if she can say no to boys, and what should we do if she cannot say no to boys. And then the Shulamite is going to come back and answer them. Okay, verse 9. Let's notice here it says, they say, if she is a wall, if our little sister is a wall, we will build on her a battlement of silver. So what a wall is, they built walls around their cities to protect their cities. A wall is something that was an item of protection. So if she is a strong girl, if she has the ability to say no, she's not gullible, she's got self-control, then what you do is you build on her a battlement of silver. Now what battlements were, the battlements set up on top of the walls, and that is what the soldiers looked out to throw their spears or to shoot their arrows out of, but yet it offered protection and had openings in them where they were protected to help keep them from getting hurt. So if she's got this self-control, if she understands what dating and love and marriage is all about, then let's build on her a battlement of silver. Let's reinforce her with teaching and with guidance and with dating rules and regulations, and let's build this battlement of silver on her. But, on the other hand, if she is a door, then we shall barricade her with planks of cedar. Now to the Jews, a door was the weakest part of their defense. A door was the easiest thing for their enemy to break down and to get inside. So if we've got a young girl who is gullible, who is naive, who has no self-control, then he's saying that we will barricade her with planks of cedar. And of course, cedar, no silver for her. We're going to use the strong cedar, these strong cedar boards to barricade this door. We're going to limit what she can do. We're going to control her activities a lot more. And so essentially what he's saying here is, if a parent has several daughters, you don't treat them all the same. You look at them as individuals and you give them guidelines and rules according to what they have the ability to do. Younger sister may say, it's not fair. My older sister got to stay out till 11, but I have to be in at 10. Well, it may not be fair by her, the way she's looking at it, but here in the Song of Solomon, what they're saying is you look at each girl individually, you determine what she is capable of handling, you reinforce her, and you guide her according to what her abilities are. Now, obviously, if you have a girl who's a door, it's going to require a lot harder and a lot more industrious parenting than if you have a daughter who is a wall and who is easy to teach in this regard. Then the Shulammite is going to come back in verse 10, and she's saying, that's right, you answered the riddle right. She says, I was a wall, I had self-control, I had understanding. 3 times she told the maidens the theme of the Song of Solomon is, do not force love upon me, let it grow naturally. She had learned this lesson very well. So she says, I was a wall, and my breasts were like towers. There's nothing wrong with my hormones. I was well developed. I was ready for marriage. I was interested in boys. So this didn't happen to me because I was too young. And then she says, then I became in his eyes as one who finds peace. Because she had this understanding, then she had peace in her relationship with the shepherd and with Solomon. As we think a little bit about helping our daughters learn how to say no and developing these battlements of silver and these planks of cedar, several years ago in discussing this subject with an elder who was involved with working with a woman who was having some problems with a teenage daughter. And this elder, in working with this woman, was talking to me a little bit about it, and he said that he had observed that the most critical time in a child's life was their junior high years, and how that child got through junior high determined to a large extent what was going to happen to them in high school. And as over the years, as I have thought about what he has said and made some observations, I think that he's right, that junior high is a very critical time. And there are several reasons why junior high is a very critical time. One reason why it's a critical time is because of puberty. Many kids are entering puberty at that time. If they're not, their friends are, and their friends are talking about boy-girl relationships, and they're thinking about it. They've got all kinds of hormones that are making them notice things that they've never ever noticed before, and so they're having to deal with boy-girl attractions in a new way. And how they deal with them in junior high is going to set the pattern to a large extent to what happens to them later on. Another reason why I think junior high is a critical time is because kids are coming out of grade school where they have had perhaps 1 or 2 teachers all day long, where they have had a teacher having conferences with the parents, where they have had a teacher who is looking at that child as a whole person, as a person who's taking many subjects and they're concerned about them as a person. And when they get into junior high and they go from class to class, the teachers very seldom ever look at them as a whole person. They just have them for an hour or 45 minutes, however long class is on, and they go on to another teacher. So parents, or not parents, but teachers are not as apt to notice problems in their relationships with other students as they are in grade school. So parents are no longer getting the feedback from teachers that we got during grade school that helped us guide and watch for problems in our child as they were developing. Another reason why this is critical is because teachers are not often working together, and many times you will have teachers who will just load kids down with sometimes it's busy work, sometimes it's work that's good, but still they are loading them down. And many times students are overwhelmed with schoolwork, and junior high kids can have what we call burnout, where they are frustrated by trying to keep up because they are being overworked and overburdened by teachers who are not working together together. And of course, this saps their energy, their mental energy, their physical energy, and they don't have the ability many times to deal with other problems of life. So as parents, then we need to be more aware of what's going on. We may be needing to go talk to the principal. We may be needing to go talk to the teacher about homework that is unreasonable and that is causing problems along this line. So it causes more problems for the students when they go into a different learning environment. Another reason why junior high is a critical time, as we talked about in our first class, is that their brain is unfolding 1/3 during this time in just a matter of months. They are starting to re-examine everything in a new way, and they need to be approached on a more intellectual level where they're given reasons why, many times instead of just told that they can't do anything. Another reason that I think junior high is a very critical time is because junior high students, from what I have read and heard other people say, junior high students are the biggest bigots that ever walked the face of this earth. They are bigger bigots than a lot of racists are in the way they treat other students. The pressure that they put on other students to conform with in dress and the way they act in other areas puts tremendous moral pressure on students that many times is not there in high school, it's not there in college, because they are more mature and more accepting of people as individuals. So peer pressure is probably greater in junior high than at any other time of a student's life. And so this is a very critical time, and it's a time when we need to be watching out for our students and helping and protecting them in this area, and realizing that we need to be paying more close attention than perhaps we have in other years. And as we continue to think about our building these battlements of silver and planks of cedar on our daughters and helping them in this area, there's one area that we need to talk about, an area that may help us say no, and that is in the area of modesty. And this is not in your notes, so if you want this, you're going to have to copy it down. I want us to talk a little bit about what modesty is. Modesty basically is a matter of opinion. And because it is a matter of opinion, it makes it very hard many times to understand what is involved in modesty. And I'm going to be saying some things about modesty that you've probably not heard before. That doesn't make it right, and neither does it make it wrong. So I'd like for you to listen very carefully to what I'm saying and understand what I'm saying. If you have some questions or some comments when we have our question and answer period, well, then I would be very glad to entertain anything that you would have to say. But I want you to listen and to understand what we are saying. In the area of modesty, modesty is something that I think is very hard for women to understand, because we simply do not think like men think. And so we aren't viewing things like they are viewing them. I like to, when I get an opportunity, when I'm around a man that seems to have a lot of wisdom, I like to ask him questions about how he thinks and how he views different things so that I can learn from him. And I remember one time I asked a man, I said, "What is modesty?" I told him, I said, "This is something that women really have a hard time with understanding what modesty is." His immediate reaction to me was, "You're kidding. Women don't have a problem with this. And this ought to be something very obvious to women." So I talked to him a little bit. "No, it's not obvious. It's something that is very hard. How would you define modesty? I'm interested in how you would define it." So once he realized that I wasn't kidding, that I was being very serious, then he started talking to me about modesty. And he said, basically what modesty is that a man tries to read a woman's mind by the way she dresses. And he looks at the way she dresses, and he tries to determine whether or not she will give in to his advances or whether she will not. Now, as we've talked about earlier about men needing admiration, men basically do not go out and try to get sexual favors from a woman that they think is going to reject them. They want to find out if she's going to be receptive to their advances. Their ego is not such that they like to be continually rebuffed and put down. And so they are continually trying to read a woman's mind by the way she dresses. This man had grown up in Hawaii, and he said that when he lived in Hawaii, it was very easy to read a woman's mind, because the side of her head that she wore her flower on just told all the men either I'm available or I'm spoken for. And so he grew up with this concept that it was easy to read their minds simply by the way they wore their flower. And he said that when men see a girl, then they judge her clothing by what the fashion is, to see where she is as far as the fashion is concerned, so that they can read her mind. For example, he says if the length of her skirt, if she wears her skirts shorter than the other girls are wearing their skirts, then they are reading that as a sexual message, that she is advertising that she is available. He said, take for example the area of wearing shorts. He says if shorts is the type of garment that is acceptable and is what should be worn in this situation, he says if she's wearing walking shorts, when the man knows that she could be wearing short shorts, then he is viewing that as a modest garment, whereas if she was wearing short shorts, shorter than what was necessary, then he is viewing her as someone who is advertising, I'm available. She is wearing less clothing than what the occasion demands. In the area of wearing bathing suits, and then this is something he brought up, and he was telling me about bathing suits. He says it's with bathing suits, it's the same way. If she's wearing the skimpiest, shortest, least amount of bathing suit that she can, then he, and trying to read her mind, then he is viewing this as advertisement. Whereas if she's wearing a full bathing suit, then he is viewing this as someone who is unavailable, who is not interested in horsing around and playing around. And in reading her mind, he's not going to jump to that conclusion. Several years ago, there was an elder and his wife who moved down to a home on the lake, and they wanted to make their dock and their lake available for young people to come and to swim. And they struggled with this concept of modesty. What is involved in modesty? What kind of rules are we going to make for the young people that come to swim at our lakefront property? So they invited all of the young men and all of the young women who were going to be coming to their home to come and to have discussions with the elder and his wife over a period of several weeks in order to determine what was modest and what was proper, not only dress but behavior when they were swimming. And after several weeks of talking and very, very frank, open talking with the boys talking about the way they felt and the way things looked to them, they decided that bathing suits were the proper garments to wear when you were swimming. But bathing suits were not proper garments to wear running around on the beach and being out of the water. That bathing suits were proper garments to wear in the water, and that these were more proper than wearing shorts or something like this, and that they were safer. And so their rule was that the girls were to wear bathing suits to swim in, but when they got out of the water, then they were to have some other kind of wrap to cover up with, and they were to be modest, because bathing suits were designed for swimming, not for running around on the beach. And so this was their rule that they came up with. And so this is something just for you to think about and for you to give some thought to, and we're going to look at some scriptures here in a minute too. But before we do that, when we think about modesty and about how fashion has changed over the years, you know, nearly every article of clothing that we wear today was introduced into society by prostitutes. Short skirts were introduced into society by prostitutes. Lipstick was introduced into society by prostitutes. High heels was introduced into society by prostitutes. I remember about 20 years ago when we lived in Seattle and pantsuits became the rage. The front page of the papers were covered with prostitutes on Skid Row wearing pantsuits. Prostitutes were the first ones to wear pantsuits. But then everybody else grabbed the pantsuits, said, hey, this is a neat idea, started wearing pantsuits to church, they started wearing pantsuits to weddings, they started wearing pantsuits to funerals. And do you know what? The prostitutes didn't want to wear pantsuits anymore because they were no longer unusual, they were no longer special. So what the prostitutes wear, when you see the pictures of them in the newspapers, you see the pictures of them on television shows, when you see a prostitute, what you see in the dead of winter is a girl with her skirt that is about, comes up to right to her hip length, the shortest skirt she can have on so that she can advertise, let men read her mind, I'm available. She's got on a big heavy short fur coat because it's cold, trying to keep warm, but she's out there wanting men to read her mind. I'm available, I've got what it takes to make a man happy, I'm worth the price, and this sort of thing. So these are things that we need to keep in mind, that our fashions have changed, our hemlines have changed, simply because of these women. Okay, I'm going to stop right there.